And they're also a little craftier, sleazier. More vino.
But
The American system.
Watch closely. Let's see if these children can tell the difference between Canada's leading dryer fabric softener and April Fresh Downy.
Which pile do you think is softest?
That one. To me, it feels much softer.
Oh, thank you
Downy's
very
softer,
much.
but how does it smell?
That's very kind of you.
Fresh is outside
I do
and flowers.
appreciate your wishes.
The same. It smells clean. I would like to go to bed on this thing.
Yeah? Why?
The best.
April Fresh Downy, unmistakably softer than the leading dryer brand.
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. The Moonies are back in town on a big push. And you know how I feel about the Moonies. I'm not that generous in my attitude towards them. But we can't miss the chance to try and get some specifics from Martin Porter, Sun Young Moon's man in Canada, the head of the Unification Church here. Because we've all been following the case of Michael Steffich, the young Canadian who disappeared and who has now reappeared in the hands of the U.S. authorities under, we're told, a false name. On a different topic on the air this morning, we're going to speak to John Cleghorn, the Vice President of the Royal Bank of Canada, to tell us the bad news and the good news, if anything, about the state of economy related to banking. Then I have a doctor from Toronto. I hope he doesn't take a good, close look at me. His name is Dr. Adelman, and he's from Mount Sinai Hospital. But he does have news of considerable importance to the million Canadians who suffer from a thing called angina. But first, Martin Porter of the Moonies, after the break. Martin Porter is the head of the Unification Church in Canada. Unification Church are commonly known as the Moonies. You've seen many programs on Webster pointing out the dangers, the fears, the worries, and the concerns about the parents of Canadian young adults who have disappeared into what I brutally call the maw of the Moonies. And only recently we heard the news, which many of us suspected was happening, that a number of non-Americans were picked up, on this occasion in San Francisco, Australians, British, and Canadians, and at least one of them, Michael Steffich, is accused of living under the name of John Walton, and his name is Michael Steffich, in a Moonie establishment in San Francisco. With the best will in the world, Mr. Porter, have the events in San Francisco not proved that the heavenly deception, which I believe is practiced by your people, is dangerous to the extreme and has now got your organization into trouble with the law in San Francisco?
I think people should be absolutely clear with who they are, who they represent, what their name is, and so on. I don't know what the visa situation is in the States, but I'm sure everybody can obtain a visa to live in whatever nation to do what they plan to do. I don't know what's really happened down in San Francisco.
Don't you accept the fact that the U.S. authorities have arrested Steffich? There's an aside charge of assaulting a federal officer, a $75,000 bond, and that 7 others have to leave the country because they were in there illegally or overstayed their permission as adherents of the Moonies.
Yes, I do hear this, but I do think everybody's responsible to get a visa. everybody's responsible to get their own visa to live in a country if they're not a resident of that country.
You're not
It's their
answering my question, though.
responsibility.
If I'm a young Canadian, and this has happened many times, walking down a street in San Francisco or Seattle, and I'm invited to go for dinner with someone in some associated thing, I'm not advised to get a visa, am I? And I disappear into the maw of the Moonies.
But I think everybody is responsible to get a visa. We have very few foreigners here in Canada. They all have visas. It is their responsibility. If they want to stay in Canada, they need a visa to stay in Canada.
So
They
you
understand
say that if Steffich is in trouble for being under a phony name, John Walton, and I believe the young South African Philip Rogers, whom you were going to tell me about, and I don't think you're dead, is under the name of Ian Smith. Do the Moonies practice heavenly deception in changing the names of their adherents who are illegally in the United States?
I cannot accept this. If some people do this, I'm sorry for them, but I would not accept this. It is not something we practice here in Canada, and I just don't accept this. I have my own name. I live under my own name. Why should I change my name?
Last time you were here, you told me that that your segment of the Moonies does not follow the practices in the United States. Is that correct?
We don't do this. If this is what they're doing in the States, we do not do this.
My simple thing is, and I said yesterday, that it would seem that a conversion to the Unification Church puts a youngster in placid penury, acting as a slave to raise money for Sun Myung Moon.
This is not true at all.
This is a
People
lie.
who hear the truth may have a spiritual conversion, and then if they dedicate their life, they will go in a certain direction in their life. They will do different activities, naturally, to develop their faith and their experience in life.
I have here a body of material I've collected over the years. I've interviewed Edwards, Freed, many other dissident Moonies, some of whom have been deprogrammed. Are they all lying to me when they tell stories about being fed low-protein foods and sent out to beg on the streets?
Well, please come to one of our centers and eat our food and find out for yourself if it's low protein, high protein. I would say that the food we eat is like any other Canadian might eat.
If I become a Moonie, which is highly unlikely, but if I do, will I be sent out to beg on the streets with candies, flowers, God knows what not, bring my cash back, which is sent off to bank accounts for Sun Myung Moon?
No. All the money we raise here in Canada, it serves the purpose of Canada. And people aren't begging. They talk about their faith. They ask people if they'd like to contribute. And if people want to contribute, they do. Most of our activities are teaching. Our activities are giving people a spiritual understanding of life, trying to establish a relationship with the living God. This is the essence of our church, and this is what makes us different from other churches, the basic teaching of the church.
You and I are living in two different worlds then.
Yes,
I
we are.
believe everything I'm told about the placid penury of the Moonies and the kind of slave brainwashing.
I don't believe
Am
this.
I a liar?
The point is that many people who come on your program are either deprogrammers or people that are deprogrammed, and they say the same thing. Why don't you talk to the tens of thousands of happy members of Unification Church who are happy to be there?
Why are they happy?
Because they found something meaningful in their life. Take a life of a Moonie. He's out and he's having to confront his faith every single day. People criticize his faith or comment on his faith. He has to know exactly what he's doing, and he must believe in it, or else he couldn't continue day by day.
Well,
you know
tell me,
that very well.
All of these things that I've reported and told about and veritably believe are lies.
Certain people have a reason to criticize religion. They're anti-religious people, and other people are giving misinformation. I would say to anybody, come and find out for yourself. Study the teaching. See what effect it has on you. You can do that at home. You don't have to come to me. You can take our books and read them at home and find out for yourself.
I think you're very clever people, and you may have some strange dedication, but you use a technique of brainwashing.
This is absolutely absurd. We don't do this sort of business in Canada.
Oh, you do it in California?
Well, if they do, that's their business. But come to hear what I'm teaching. But basically, the thing is this, that it's a spiritual teaching, and if God comes into your life, it changes. Now, you talk about the programming or brainwashing, but the fact is, there is no secular expression to explain a spiritual conversion. People have a religious conversion like they do in almost any church.
Oh, I get it.
And this changes their life.
I get it. I'm an agent of Satan who is persecuting you as the early Christians were persecuted.
I didn't say that.
Right?
But we are certainly persecuted like all religions have been persecuted at the beginning. Christianity is not persecuted so much today in Canada because it's part of the establishment.
Okay.
But early on it was, like all other religions were.
Is Sun Myung Moon a Christian?
Definitely it's a Christian church.
I thought he was the second coming.
Why don't you talk to some theologians that have studied our teaching, like Professor Richardson or other people, that will give you deep insight into what they say. Is it Christian or is it not Christian?
I think
is
it's
it
a
a
cult.
development Christian?
It could be a religion eventually, but at the moment it's in a cult stage where you worship a living God by the name of Sun Myung Moon.
This is not true.
Not true.
Not true.
How big is business nowadays?
What business?
How much is he worth, Sun Myung?
I have no idea. But everything he has, he uses for the purpose of
$1
the
billion?
church. He doesn't use money for himself, but he uses it for the church.
Why are you hated so much in places like Gloucester, Massachusetts, where your organization moved in and bought villages and
But this is a very good example
Why?
of your misinformation. In Gloucester,
Dangerous.
we own 2 houses, 1 small restaurant, and 1 small lobster factory. That's the only thing we own. And this was reported just recently in BC as we'd bought up the city and all the fishermen are out of work. In actual fact, we pay the fishermen more for lobsters than other people do. Because we do so much of the processing, we can still make a profit
you're
in the
a
end.
very successful commercial organization.
Well, we have some successful businesses. We have to finance ourselves.
How much is he worth?
I
I've
have
seen
no absolute-
estimates of $1 billion.
I would not
money.
believe such a thing.
Does he not represent himself as the second coming of God?
Absolutely not.
Who is he?
But study the teaching and make up your mind who he is, what he's doing.
I don't
He's
mind-
teaching God consciousness. He's trying to raise people's spiritual standard, to raise them to understand God. Make up your mind what he's doing. He teaches we must all be like Christ.
All
and I
right.
think that's a very healthy
I
attitude.
give up. You're not going to answer any questions, but let me ask you this specifically. How many Moonies are there in Canada?
There are about 100 full-time Moonies, and then part-time Moonies maybe just short of 1,000.
Are you planning a big push in the streets to sell candies, flowers, and old food that you might get from McDonald's hamburgers or somebody?
No, we don't go in for this sort
You
of
don't go in
business.
for that?
We do raise money in different ways, and if people want to give, they give, and if they don't want to give, they don't
How do you
give.
raise money?
We talk about what we're doing, and people give money. We sometimes give them as token, something like candy or something like this, but we're not selling per se.
Do they say, I am a member of the Unification Church?
Yes, we do.
They
sir.
must do that.
This is what I teach here, and I continually teach it.
Do you
And I
ins-
think almost everybody does this.
Does every Moonie peddler have a license?
If it is required, if a license is required, we try to get licenses, that's sure. In certain provinces, one needs a peddler's license. In other provinces, we can do it as on a religious basis.
But you're on
only.
the same money-raising kick with youngsters begging in the streets.
Why do you think that? Why do you say that?
I'm asking you.
You know, do you have any idea what our income is here in Canada?
No, the last time you
It is
told me it
public
was
rank.
$621,000.
It's slightly more last year, but it's only very slightly more.
How much
and if
is
you
it
think
now?
about, it's about 670. It's public record, where we, you know, our income and our expenses is all public record. And to think about what we do with this, it is remarkable we can do so much. Because we don't pay salaries and people volunteer
I
their
don't know what you
time,
do.
we can do a great deal with that.
And there are no salaries to any of the peddlers or collectors for you?
No,
None at
because
all?
people volunteer their time.
But-
My time is volunteered. I don't get paid for what I do.
None at all?
Not at all.
Independently wealthy?
I take expenses, but I don't get paid for what I do, and I don't want to get paid
Well,
either.
if you live in expenses only, of course you don't have to pay any income tax.
I don't take an income, so I don't have to pay taxes.
taxes.
I think one has to pay, if one's benefits are more than a certain amount, I think people do pay taxes at a certain point.
All right. Now, are you going to have a big push in Vancouver to have... Oh, how many cities are you pushing in now?
We're going to work in many different cities.
All throughout BC?
No, some of the main cities.
So is it fair for me, anytime I meet a youngster, a kind of placid youngster, and most of them are placid, I used to see them all the time, can I say to him, are you a Moonie? And what will he tell me?
He'll probably say he's a member of Unification Church, which
But
is
he-
the correct term.
But you have a number of other names.
No, we are Unification Church.
And you're not going to use any heavenly deception, are you?
I don't believe in this.
But you will love bomb the people who become adherents.
I don't use that term either.
Will you be inviting people on the streets to come vaguely to dinner?
We will invite people to our center, and they will find out right away who we are, because we have a nice big sign outside the building, who we are, and the pictures inside the building will show exactly who we are. So nobody is
And
deceived.
will they be sent out on a daily basis, early in the morning, to collect a quota of money?
Not necessarily.
What do you mean not necessary?
Some people do have a mission and they do collect money, but most of the people are speaking about the truth.
Well, I want to be fair
Because
to
we
you.
want people to know. And if we are deceptive, people will not know who we are. I'm speaking, as you know, at the Hyatt, and I'll be speaking about the time in which we're living.
And you will take questions about your techniques of money raising.
I'm going to speak, I have a prepared speech, and then we'll have a workshop after this. People can ask any questions in the workshop.
But can
Let
I
them
tell
ask.
people from night on, if you see somebody in the street collecting money for flowers or candies, and they say, I want to give you this flower, you'll say, who are you? They will say, I'm a member of the Unification Church.
All the people I train say they are
Will they
members
get
of
a receipt for
Unification
the
Church.
$1 or the $2?
They can ask for a tax-deductible receipt.
Calls to Dr. Martin Porter. Dr. Martin Porter?
Reverend
Or just
Martin
Martin?
Porter.
The Reverend Martin. Ordained by the Unification Church.
Yes, that's right.
Not by one of the established churches.
No.
And to his persecutor, Webster, after the raid. Just got 7 or 8 minutes for Dr. Porter. I have other commitments in the program, so keep your comments, kindly or unkindly, but do keep them short. Go ahead, please.
Dr. Porter?
Yes.
I remember a few years ago when your followers were collecting on the street, the thing that they were after was they were collecting money for a children's camp. What I'd like to know is where are these camps and where do these children come from that are at these camps?
Quite honestly, we don't have a children's camp, and we were never fundraising for a children's camp.
Well, I beg to differ. That's what your followers are saying.
Well, I'm very sorry. I always train people, and I say to them, for the purpose for which we're raising money, it's for our educational programs and so on. So we don't have a children's camp. We have no people in our church that are active members under 21 years old.
So they may have lied or been using heavenly deception.
I'm not even sure that it's true. I'm very sorry.
It was both in Vancouver and in Winnipeg that the same type of approach was used in collecting money.
We've got your point. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
Reverend Porter?
Yes, that's me.
We have heard that Reverend Sun Young Moon supports an arms factory in South Korea. Is this true?
In South Korea, we do have a machine shop. It makes very many different things like lathes.
Guns and armament.
Listen, it makes many different machines. Now, because of the situation in South Korea, all machine shops are required to make some government contracts. Exactly what these are, I don't know.
I think you
So
got
I
an
can't
answer.
answer the question.
Ipso facto, it probably makes guns for the Korean government, not the most democratic government in the world. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning, ma'am.
Yes, I was listening to your Reverend Porter, and as far as I'm concerned, if he and Mr. Moon are allowed to continue, we will have another situation like Jim Jones and Guyana. It is very serious, and it upsets me when I hear that people are being kidnapped and put in camps.
That is a very offensive question because it's very far from the truth. We're not living in a jungle. We're living in downtown Vancouver, downtown of cities. We're not isolating people in camps. We're living in society where we can do our mission. So there's nothing. And please remember one thing. Jim Jones was a member of the Disciples of Christ, one of the mainline religions. And I believe the Disciples of Christ are trying to make some unity with the United Church of Canada. This is what I hear.
No, they are not.
Thank you very much. But you see, you can't get away from the fact that when you meet Moonies, they appear to be glassy-eyed, placid slaves.
Do I have glassy eyes? Do I look like a placid slave?
No, because
You
you're not a working Moonie. You're a boss Moonie.
There's nothing very much that's different. I do everything everybody else does.
Fair enough.
But please, just meet the Unification Church members. They're very intelligent people. They'd have to be, and they'd have to know what they believe, or else they couldn't continue day by day.
Funny, though, that you never take ghetto kids, do you? You don't take blacks, you don't take ghetto.
Everybody comes to our church. We try to help everybody.
You
So
seem
that
to
isn't
attract
true.
people like young Steph H, or that young accountant, Philip Rogers from South Africa, now known as Ian Smith. How come you can get away? Your organization, don't
But
tell
I
me.
think there are people of all different levels. I don't know what the breakdown is of how many people have been to high school, how many university kids, and so on.
But
there are people of all types.
The Boonville camp near San Francisco is a camp.
Yes, but it's a training facility. People go there for a short time, then they go back to San Francisco to continue with their missions.
Well, you say one thing and I believe another thing. Go ahead, please, from Courtney.
Yes, this is Joe. I was just wondering if the Reverend could tell me if, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on the air, whether Procter & Gamble...
No, it's got nothing to do with Procter & Gamble. I've said that 1,000 times. Procter & Gamble get most upset that the little insignia is supposed to influence some Moonie, to show some Moonie influence. Not true, correct?
Absolutely not true.
Absolutely untrue.
Procter & Gamble existed before Unification Church was founded.
And have no connection with it.
Absolutely none.
Go ahead, please. Hello. Nobody there. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jack, I'm amazed at how your guest manages to wiggle his way out of things. I'm going to identify myself so that if he wants to challenge me, he can. It's Tom Lalonde from the Greater Vancouver Renters Association. And last year when we ran our office in Burnaby, which was upstairs from Rosemary Brown and Sven Robinson's office, we had a young woman that came around the building trying to sell everybody in the building some food. And it was supposedly for some world mission project to feed the needy and the hungry. And she was calling herself, and I forget the name of the mission. After some questioning, she admitted that in fact she was from the Unification Church. When I queried as to whether or not she had a license from the municipality of Burnaby to allow her to do this, she produced a little green missionary card and said that was the license that she needed. I then contacted Phil Kenzies from the licensing department in Burnaby, who informed me, in fact, that no licenses had been issued whatsoever. They tried to track her down with an RCMP patrol car to ascertain whether or not she was soliciting in a proper fashion. And she then took off. So this man is attempting to mislead people. He's telling nothing but lies. He's saying that they totally open themselves up and let you know who they are. That's
Okay,
a lie. He's saying that if a license is required, that is what they do. That, again, is a lie. And you know, I think that the game that he plays is that he tries to not commit himself.
Okay, hold on. You've said enough. This is a common complaint I get, and everybody seems to have it, and you say it's not so.
No, I have my reservations if this is a true statement. I've always taught the members to say who they are, where they come from, and I hope everybody does this. They are supposed to do this because there's no advantage to us if we're raising money and people don't know who they're giving it to. There's no advantage if we're talking to people about a truth and we don't identify it, because then people, how are they going to find out about it in greater depth?
Will you please tell people not to give money to any person on the street who talks about vague things, but that they will identify themselves with a peddler's license and a Unification Church symbol.
They all carry an ID from Unification Church.
That's a missionary card.
Let the people ask.
But you must obey the law. You cannot break the law. If you're going to peddle in Vancouver, and that's the proper title for it, you've got to have licenses.
I believe so.
And if you don't, you'll be in trouble.
I believe so.
And you reject totally the myriad stories I've had that youngsters work long hours up early in the morning, are brainwashed, and have to collect a quota of money.
Absolutely baloney. They do not have a quota, and they do work very, very hard. It's up to them how long they work. It depends on their investment.
All for the dedication of Sun Young Moon?
No, it's for the church. It's not for him. It's for the church.
And they get paid nothing?
They don't want to get paid. They want to give their time because they believe the message. Otherwise, they couldn't do it.
Okay, if you want to join the Reverend Mooney's church, the Sun Young Moon's church, remember that you'll be paid nothing. You'll be housed. You'll not be allowed sex or drugs, and you'll have to raise your quota of cash. And you should have your peddler's license. If not, you'll be in trouble. That's accurate, isn't it?
Some of that, what you said is accurate.
Some of it's accurate. Go ahead, please. Hello. No, I missed that one. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, that Reverend, there's my younger brother was in with that sect, whatever you want to call it, but he ended up nothing but a dope addict and everything, and he ended up...
Even I must say that Moonies have never been accused of using dope. That's the one kind thing I'll say about you this morning.
And we don't allow premarital sex. We teach people to clean up their lives. And some people don't like cleaning up their lives and make their own choices. Let them do it.
I'm not going to wish you well, because I don't wish you well.
That's okay. I can live with that too.
But I do thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Next, no, he belongs to a different kind of cult, the banking cult.
Perhaps you should let them know when I'm giving a speech tomorrow.
You already told them.
Oh, I did tell you.
And I'll tell you, Hyatt Regency. When is that? Tomorrow night?
Thursday night.
How much did that cost you? The Hyatt.
To rent a room
Yeah.
there? I think it's about $400 or something like that. It's not very much.
Comparatively modest. My thanks to Martin. No, I'm not thanking him. Martin Porter is now finished. Next, John Cleghorn of the Royal Bank. John Cleghorn is the Senior Vice President of the Royal Bank, and I'm not going to nag him about profits because they were down $58.7 million in which period? Can't read these things.
First quarter ending January.
So we'll forget about the profits.
Right.
I want your firm opinion on the state of the economy and whether or not we are headed, and you can tell from your receiverships, your collections, your applications for credit. Are we headed for a real bad recession or even a depression, John Cleghorn, from the way the banking business stands now? You're the strongest, most reliable bellwether on the economy.
Jack, we're not headed for a recession, we're in one. And as far as depression, if you use statistics, I suppose it's a bad recession looking at depression, but not a depression like the 30s.
Why wouldn't it become a depression like the 30s? We get all kinds of bad news. Cominca closing down for 6 weeks, vast percentage of the forest industry out, provincial government revenues seriously down, maybe short $250 or $350 million. What's going to hold us up?
I think it's a cyclical downturn. We had it in the mid-70s, we had it in the early 70s, through the 60s and into the 50s as well. And you need that every once in a while, because the other side of the coin, when we had growth in 1979, 1980, the kind of inflation we were having at that time, the kind of growth was not sustainable. Remember what happened to the housing market here, for example. The economy was overheated. So we're into a major cooling off period, if you want to call it that. But we've had corrections before. It's just that the extent of the corrections going on right now are perhaps some more serious.
What astonishes me is the way, for instance, the real estate market has virtually, even if prices haven't come down more than 20 or 25%, the sales have collapsed. Am I not correct?
Right. There's no demand right now. I think people are holding off. Interest rates are still too high for a lot of people to be able to afford housing. Others who have mortgages coming up for renewal are facing high rates, so they're having to cut back on other things. A lot of the housing demand were people upgrading, and that's just not happening today.
Now, what about interest rates right now? They've cooled off a little bit. What's the prime bank rate just at the moment?
16.5%.
So that means if I'm a businessman with good credit, I can get it for what, 17.5%?
Well, it varies, Jack.
But a prime plus 1 or prime plus 2?
Well, it's, no, as I say, it varies depending on the company and depending on track record and that kind of thing. But they can be, many companies get prime, many companies get the kind of rates you're talking about.
What's the advice you have to smaller businessmen who find it very difficult to keep their inventories going on slow sales, on paying either to you or some other financial institution somewhere upwards of 16.5%, 17.5%? What's your advice to businessmen now?
Well, interest is part of their cost. I think they're going to have to take a hard look at the markets they sell to. They're going to have to take a look at the prices they may be getting or whether they're going to have any demand at all, because if they're facing high inventories, the customers they sell to are also facing high inventories and are perhaps cutting back. So talk to your customers. People are finding also that their customers may be dragging the receivables a little bit, and I think that they have to talk to the people they deal with, they have to talk to their suppliers, and they've got to talk to their financial partners, in many cases the banker, and keep everybody informed of what's happening. Draw several sets of plans, too, of what's going to happen, say, in the next 3 or 4 years. A poor scenario, perhaps a realistic scenario, maybe an optimistic scenario.
Do you notice many of your people trimming back their operating costs and laying off staff?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the unemployment will burgeon even more as people look at the balance sheet and say, oh my God.
This is not going to be a fun year.
Do you see any sign of any forecast as to when we might level out or perhaps go up again?
I think early part of it, well, if we're talking about we, you mean in British Columbia?
Yes, British Columbia.
Okay. Because I think Ontario is going through probably the worst correction they've had since the 30s. Which is tending to affect the overall averages in Canada. But as far as British Columbia is concerned, I don't think we're going to see any real turnaround until sometime mid-1983. And that's perhaps realistic, not optimistic.
Did you say that again, 1983? Mm-hmm. The middle of 1983?
A year from now.
It all depends. In other words, this you don't call it a depression, you call it a recession, downturn.
Well, I think the term depression, people associate
psychologically bad,
dirty 30s. 10 years of downturn, no confidence. People just put their money aside. The banks had actually a decrease in their amount of business. Loans just went down. People didn't do anything. They just sat back. But governments were in a very different state than they are today in terms of their ability to operate in the economy. Our economy in Western Canada was a very narrow one. The whole prairie economy had been built on wheat, and the whole railway system, town infrastructure, that sort of thing had all been built on wheat, and wheat collapsed in the late 20s. And coupled with that, we had horrendous dust bowls. And I think that British Columbia, being the port for a lot of that activity, or Vancouver, suffered as well. Today we've got much broader economies and we have much broader
and the
future
other thing
businesses.
is that transfer payments, support payments, welfare, unemployment insurance, and all those that kind of...
very small in those days.
There was nothing in those days, really. So that will prevent the recession from becoming immediately visible, although there will be much hardship.
We've had hardship before in the 70s, twice before in the 70s, and we're having
nothing like this, though.
Well, we had some pretty serious downturns in 74, 75. You remember fishing industry was terrible. The housing market was flat for about 3 years, and they were closing down lumber mills in both the mid-70s and the early 70s as well.
You're nothing but the bearer of gloomy tidings this morning. More with John Cleghorn, Vice President of the Royal Bank, after the break. Listen, I've got Tom Siddon, Richmond South Delta, on the phone from Ottawa. Have the bells stopped ringing yet?
No, not yet, Jack, but they will stop after 2 o'clock today. The Progressive Conservative Caucus met this morning, and we've agreed that because the government has decided to call other business and to begin negotiating seriously the dividing up of this major energy security bill, that we will vote on our motion to adjourn the House this afternoon, and then Parliament will get back to work.
How many days?
House Leader Yvonne Pinard publicly conceded on both the points that we had requested, that they call other business and that they then discuss the dividing up of this bill. They have agreed to that now, so we will vote to get the House back into action this afternoon.
What's the time limit for negotiating? 6 days?
Yes, it could well go into next Monday or Tuesday through the weekend, but in the meantime we will be debating opposition motions, and tomorrow we will be initiating a debate on parliamentary reform in the context of the damage that the present parliamentary system is causing to our economy, with our unemployment and high interest rate problems, and the general frustration that members of Parliament have felt that they haven't been able to properly address these problems.
Okay, Tom, the position now is that Pinard has promised to split the bill but hasn't said he'll put it into the 10 pieces you want. You will vote on your motion this afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You'll be in the House tomorrow for Opposition Day, and then you'll have another Opposition Day. Is that correct?
Another Opposition Day Friday and perhaps Monday. And by that point, we hope the government will agree to bring forward perhaps some portions of the bill which are urgent and which we don't find controversial, and we'll get on with disposing of those quickly next week.
And now that you're back in the...
But the other more contentious matters we will want to discuss with the government.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
Pinar, in fact, promised not once but 3 times yesterday that he would accept Nielsen's proposition as a basis for negotiating a solution to this problem, and we accept that promise at face value.
Okay, Tom, much obliged.
Okay, Jack.
The country doesn't congratulate either of you, but they're glad that you got back to some form of sanity. Much obliged, Tom. God bless. I think we're all glad that the bells have stopped ringing, haven't we, Mr. Cleghorn?
That's right.
Does this hiatus in the House of Commons actually affect the climate for business?
Well, I think it's...
Not really.
No, except that people are somewhat confused with what's been happening in Ottawa in the last several months.
One line has been that the Parliament was moving towards an artificial restructuring of interest rates. Can you give me your professional opinion whether such a thing is first possible and secondly desirable?
Do you mean that we'd have a different rate structure ignoring what's going on in the United States? Is that what you mean?
That's what
that's not possible.
It's just not possible.
No.
For instance, if the Bank of Canada or the Parliament said in some way, housing mortgages will come down to 10% and that's what the banks will loan, is that not a possible arbitrary edict which would have some good effect on the economy?
If they could legislate a reduction in inflation, that would be the first step, and then the other things would follow. For example, if inflation's running at 12%, if you had some money to keep in your savings account, would you put it at, say, 9% or 8%? If the cost of living is running at 11 or 12, you'd be losing money, in effect.
No, I wouldn't do it, but I might...
But how do we lend... how does anybody make a mortgage at 10% if I have to turn around and pay you 15 or 14% for your savings?
Your so-called obscene profits would disappear very quickly.
Well, you know, our mortgage portfolio at our organization, I'm not sure what it's at the other banks and credit unions and trust companies, but probably similar. The bulk of our mortgages are sitting at about 12% today. So the vast bulk of people who own homes, while many are facing renewals, we're still sitting with a portfolio at 12%.
Let me get that. You're saying that existing mortgages, the vast mass of them...
We have over $4 billion on our books at a little over 12% today.
Which breaks your heart.
Yes, it does.
At least you're honest about it.
Well, the thing is that these mortgages are put on over the last 3, 4, 5 years before. Many of them are coming up for renewal and they will be paying a higher rate.
Yeah. Have you any special tips on mortgages just now, how best to do it?
Stay short. Don't go out, you know,
Don't say stay short. What do you mean stay short?
Well, there aren't too many 5-year mortgages even being offered, but 1 year's mortgage, some organizations are even offering 6 months mortgages.
How many people, or have you any idea the number of people who have taken advantage of the so-called provision in the so-called budget that if I have no equity, I can delay the payment of my interest this year and just tack it on the end of my mortgage? That's in the budget.
Well, that's in effect what people are doing if they are borrowing refinancing their mortgage every year.
Capitalizing the interest.
In effect, yes.
But you haven't had much of a demand from that from ordinary people.
Many people are actually trying to pay down the amount of their mortgage.
This is the best tip they can do, is it?
Exactly. If they have the savings to do it.
If they've got $5,000 they're not dependent on, it's a good thing to take advantage of your mortgage provision and pay down the principal.
That's right.
Don't most mortgages have a 3 months interest clause in it?
No, many of them have, well, first of all, if your term is short, if your mortgage is renewable every year, then you can do it once a year. Some also have a provision where they can pay down 10% without penalty, that sort of thing. So take a hard look at the mortgage.
Your advice on mortgages still is stay short.
And get as much flexibility in the terms as you can.
But inflation can't be beaten until we have a fair measure of unemployment and suffering. Is that correct?
Well, we're going through that right now. I don't think we're going to kill inflation completely, but get it down from the levels that it has been. And we're running right now around 11.5%, 12% real range. The U.S. is probably in the range of 8.5% right now. But in the trough of the recession, it'll drop down to much lower figures.
All right, put on your black cloak and your big mustache and tell me just how brutal you're being on calling debentures.
You mean foreclosures and bankruptcies?
We had one case where a bank sent along the bailiff, the bank manager, and the receiver at the same time on a debenture.
Actually, the vast bulk of our clients are still hanging in there, and many of them that are in difficulty, we're hanging in with them. And there's just no point panicking. There's no point sending everybody out in the street with a bunch of houses or fish boats or, in some cases, farms or lumber mills to sell, because...
Because you can't run them as well as the existing management, can you?
That's absolutely correct.
So you're not, as a matter of rote, when a guy is well over, slapping in the receiver?
Well, you see the percentages of increase in bankruptcies, but those are Canadian figures. And the big increase is occurring in Ontario and Quebec, where, as I mentioned, they've got a tremendous change going on in the structure of the economy. The companies that directly work and supply the automotive industry are going through a structural change that many will never recover from. We have a different structure of economy out here.
Yeah, bankruptcies are going up. What about foreclosures? Are foreclosures on home mortgages notable within your experience?
Hardly any.
That's because you're being kind.
Well, we've set up a process across the country, and we have what we call an ombudsman, our mortgage manager for British Columbia. People have difficulty, they can call up and we can work out individual packages for them. Many people have done that. If people are laid off, if they're ill, we're obviously not going to move against them, because we want to get them in a position where they can get back to health. Many people can restructure their personal finances. If they come in and talk to their bank manager or the person they deal with at the bank, something can be worked out in most cases.
And you will not, as a matter of rote, foreclose on houses if someone's unemployed for some time?
Well, we don't want to do that.
Are you doing it, though?
I can't think of any, if there's the odd case, it might be for other reasons. The person might have said, listen, would you get this thing off our back? And in some cases, they're tossing the keys and walking away.
So your advice, broadly speaking, is that even if you're in trouble with your bank, which might be the Royal Bank, don't panic.
That's right. Come in and see us.
You won't push them too hard.
We want to work something out.
Unless it's a real bad situation when you'll put on your black hat and slap in the receiver. Right? In a bad situation. I mean, you're not...
There are always exceptions.
You're almost as bad as Dr. Porter.
Really?
I withdraw that. I take that back. I take it back sincerely.
Thank you.
Couldn't be.
Look into my eyes when you say...
Oi, oi, oi. That's the Mooney chant. Now you put me off my stroke. Questions to John Cleghorn of the Royal Bank after the break. John Cleghorn, Vice President of the Royal Bank. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Cleghorn.
Good morning.
I'm a widow in West Vancouver. And just a year ago now, I took a cause to you, and you won me some interest from the Royal Bank, and I was just so happy. I think you're a fantastically intelligent young man, and I'd trust you with all my money anytime.
Good morning to you.
Thank you.
How the world has changed. Go ahead, please. That's you.
Hello?
That's you, sir.
Good morning.
Oh, come on. Turn down the sound on your television.
Okay, Mr. Cleghorn, I had $100,000 last summer, and I asked...
On deposit?
Mr. Whoever you are, turn down your sound, please.
I asked the bank to borrow me another $100,000.
To lend you $100,000?
They refused me. I worked for 10 years steady. I like to know how do people that don't have more than $12,000, $13,000 in their bank account get money, and what gives your bank loaners, give them authority to keep personal information?
Oh, now, does that make any sense to you, John?
No,
Tackle
it doesn't
if
really.
you can. Okay, well, leave it alone. Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, Jack. Good morning.
Good morning.
I have 2 reprimands to deliver.
Right?
One to yourself for browbeating your previous guest and then sitting in front of this man from the banking industry and having a little fireside chat with him. He's sitting in a position affecting a great number of people and to their detriment, and you're having a fireside chat.
Okay.
And he's sitting there self-righteous as hell, telling people to go short-term on their mortgage. Short-term mortgages benefit people in the long run because they are protecting themselves, but it also gives the bank more business.
Hey, hang on. Are you betting on an increase in mortgage rates in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, it's not a question of betting. If they go short-term, they have to renew their mortgage 6 months, every 6 months, correct?
Yes, but...
Charge for resetting their mortgage.
No.
There's no charge.
No.
All right, they're benefiting in protecting themselves in long-term decrease.
I think what they should do is go in and look at various options. I said try to get as much flexibility as possible. There are not a lot of experts out there because we're faced with interest rate levels that are as high as they've been in 100 years. There are several forecasts which say that rates could come down by the summertime, up by the end of next year, and down again 18 months from now. And then you get another group that say that it's going to come down and stay down by the end of the year. But if it stays down, that means we're into a pretty bad recession.
All right, thank you for your time. I just wanted to express the
No,
wishes
no,
of
no,
some
no,
of
no.
the people that see banks as
But
an
listen.
industry that's been screwing the people for a long, long time.
Oh, wait a minute. If you want to shop the rates, go around to a credit union or a trust company and see if you can get a better deal.
Hey, I'm not saying the credit unions are that good.
Well, browbeat him some more, please.
All right, I'd like to question him more about the dominance of the banking industry in the drawing up of the Bank Act, which regulates the banks, and they have their own review board that goes before the committee of the Commons and as well to the committee of the Senate, and they put forward their case to these committees, and they're paying these guys bundles of money.
Well, you know what happened in the last Bank Act, don't you?
No.
There are a lot of new banks that are coming into Canada, foreign-owned banks, and it's interesting that none of them want to get set up in the consumer banking or retail banking area. They want to get set up in the commercial side because they think that's where they're going to be able to break in and do well.
Right.
I guess
you're saying that foreign banks shouldn't enter this country while you guys go across the oceans
I never said
establish banks for the same purposes.
Well,
you're cross-cutting your issue. You say they can't come here, but you can go there.
We've never said they couldn't come here.
But you don't want them here, do you?
Oh, we'd like them here so we can go to their countries. In many countries, there's a rule of reciprocity.
Okay,
If we don't
thank
let
you
them
for your
in,
time,
we can't
Jack.
get in.
You should be doing this browbeating, and I'll leave the line now.
Thank you.
Good for you. Sorry I didn't browbeat you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, good morning. Mr. Cleghorn.
Yes.
I got a question for you, and I'll hang up and listen to your answer. What do you think about the new system that some of the credit unions in the interior, and I read in the paper last night that now one in North Vancouver is thinking about going to a bi-weekly, to a mortgage that's paid bi-weekly instead of paid by the month. It's automatically taken out of your account. And apparently, doing it that way, you get extra monthly payment during the year. And according to the report, on a 25-year mortgage, you would roughly save $94,000 on that. This was computed on a $50,000 mortgage.
All right.
Okay, we got the question. We got the question.
$50-some dollars.
Yes, I have the question. Take a look at that, and you could actually calculate if you had the surplus funds from your salary or whatever put aside into an account that earned you interest, and you made your mortgage payments from that once a month, you'd find that the interest that you would accumulate over the same period of time would save you money. Really what they're doing is, if you're paying it down faster, you could build up the surplus yourself instead of giving them the surplus funds.
You mean put it in a daily interest saving account?
Exactly.
What we call the Finley formula, after a colleague of mine who first publicized it. Not a bad idea, is it?
The thing is, I think
you won't do it for people on the basis of the bi-weekly payment.
We're not doing it yet, but I think that if anybody is looking at renewal of a mortgage, or they're looking at a new mortgage, to shop around and see the best deal that they can get for what they want based on their own budget and their own financial
That's a good
means.
plan, Matt, though. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Cleghorn.
Good morning.
You're making the banks sound similar to Las Vegas when you speak of 6-month short-term mortgages versus 3- and 5-year short-term mortgages. My question to you, sir, is, first of all, I want to expound on it a little bit. At one time, you were not allowed to refinance a loan if you couldn't afford it. Now, with the new Bank Act allowing shorter-term mortgages of 3 and 5 years, you can refinance every 3 to 5 years. What that means is that you never make a dent on the principal of your mortgage. All you're paying every 3 to 5 years is interest, interest, interest. And I might suggest to you, sir, that the banks are browbeating this word inflation so that they are allowed to do this. Now, when I was growing up, inflation was still there was still inflation, but people could take out a 10 or a 20-year term mortgage.
Right.
And I'm suggesting to you, sir, that the 3- and the 5-year mortgages are only ways for the banks to make higher profits without anybody ever really paying off the principal.
If you take a look at the whole financial system in Canada, whether it's a trust company or a credit union or a bank, the system moved to a shorter term mortgage. Actually, the people are amortizing the payments over a 25-year period, but or 20. But the rate is renegotiated, and in the late 1960s, it started with a 5-year mortgage, and they were negotiated every 5 years, and then they got shorter and shorter as interest rates went higher.
Why can't we get a 25-year term mortgage?
Well, you can get a 25-year, but in terms of the rate,
you can't get a 25-year term mortgage.
There's a very good reason for that. That's because savers are not putting money away for 25 years. If you go down to the state of Washington,
they've had about the state of Washington.
Well, it's a neighbor, so it's a different market. So just hear me out for a moment. There they had usury laws where you could not charge more than 12%. We were talking to some of the financial institutions in Seattle at the end of the year. We asked them how many mortgages they had made in the past year at 12%. They couldn't remember any. So if you keep rates artificially low, people aren't going to be able to get money.
I want to ask you another question, sir. What is the profits of the Royal Bank of Canada for last year? At what percentage?
Percentage of what?
Percentage profits, gross profits, or net profits rather.
Well, our profits last year were something like less than 65 cents on $100 worth of our business, and in the first quarter of this year, they were 37 cents on $100.
What were the profits in dollars for the year?
Under $500 million.
You mean more than $450 million?
I have very little sympathy for the bank, sir.
But you'd say, your response, of course, is, and businessmen always do this to us, certainly we made a modest sum of $499 million, but it was only 65 cents in each $100
That's right.
turned over.
You know, if we reduced our interest rates last year by the amount of our profit, we could have reduced interest rates by 1%. That's all.
If you wiped out your profit,
that's right.
Interest rates would
Gave
be
it
down
all
1%.
back. Gave all the profit
and your
back.
shareholders would have been on welfare.
No dividends.
Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
That's you.
Yes, sir. I hope you don't cut me off, Jack, before I get a chance to get this across.
Don't be libelous. Don't be obscene.
I got a
Just be direct.
$40,000 loan at the Queensboro branch to buy a fish boat 2 years ago. I can't hear you.
I can hear you. Carry on.
Now, they closed that branch. They transferred my mortgage, supposedly, to my branch at Kingsway and Walker. The Royal Bank, I saw the writing on the wall after the first year when they closed the Fraser River because mine was a river boat. I spent $10,000 in renovations to go outside. The bank assured me that no problem. I had to pay $4,000 annually. That would be the interest on a $40,000 loan. When they made the transfer of the mortgage from bank to bank, they lost the ready thing. So after the first year, I had a buyer, a Vietnamese person, cash up front, and the bank couldn't find the mortgage. I called their loan officers. They said it may have been transferred to the branch at 6th and 6th in Westminster. They checked there. The girl checked and checked. The Vietnamese backed off because, you know, Chinese philosophy, Vietnamese philosophy, anything that isn't right up front, I don't want any part of it.
Sir, this sounds like a horrendous story. I'd like to look into this personally. And
I'd like you to listen to it on the air because I'm sure you don't want it on the air.
He doesn't mind, but keep it short.
All right.
To cut a long story short.
Now I owe $60,000. The bank backed off and said they changed loan managers. The loan officer confirmed that the bank had said they would be.
Well, there's always good news and there's always bad news, but it's good news this morning. And it's Dr. Adelman, who is a cardiologist from the Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. And he's going to talk quite specifically about a new type of treatment, I think, for angina, which is, what is angina pectoris?
Angina pectoris comes from the Latin, meaning anguish of the chest. And what it refers to is the chest pain that patients with obstruction or narrowing of the coronary arteries experience. This pain is usually a constricting or pressure sensation over the chest. It usually comes on with exertion, but can come on at rest. It may radiate up into their arms or into their neck.
Sharp pain.
It's constricting or pressure. That's right.
I just want to tell you, I'll have the pains by the end of the program. I'm a classic hypochondriac. I want you to know that.
Okay.
So
at least we'll have something to treat you with, Jack.
And take that back. Touch wood. Angina is not a disease.
It's a symptom. The disease is coronary artery disease, which is narrowing of the coronary arteries due to lipid plaques on them, or it's often referred to as hardening of the arteries. This causes an inadequate supply of blood to the heart muscle itself.
And it causes this constriction and the tingling sensation,
That's
which I
right.
already have in the shoulders, right?
That's right.
Now, nothing to laugh about. I know we've all got to die of something. But what is new that you're going to tell us, which apparently does something for this condition?
Well, there's been a number of ways of treating angina pectoris, and we're going to talk about, or what I've been asked to talk about, is a drug called Adalat, which is a calcium blocking agent, and it does two things. It decreases the work of the heart, and it increases the flow of blood to the heart.
Despite any hardening of the arteries which is present in these arteries?
We should mention, Jack, that you can have angina not only because of narrowing or hardening of the arteries, but because of spasm or constriction of the arteries. And this particular drug is very effective in relieving spasm of the coronary arteries.
What was the prior treatment for the pain of angina caused by constriction or whatever?
Okay. The oldest form of treatment is nitroglycerin, and these are little tablets you put under your tongue.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing the old boys with
That's right.
little case and the tablets under the tongue.
Exactly, and these tablets were very effective in relieving the pain. And there be other forms of nitrates. These are nitrates became available, which were longer acting than nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin was primarily taken when you got an attack. The other drugs that are available are called beta blocking agents. These primarily work by reducing the workload of the heart. The nitrates work this way too.
So from nitroglycerin you developed other things. Now, in what way does Adalat differ from your beta blockers or your nitrates?
Okay. The nitrates and beta blockers primarily work by reducing the workload of the heart so that the heart does not need that much oxygenated blood.
They kind of slow it down a little
slow
bit
it down.
when you get the attack.
That's
I see.
right. They actually, what the beta blockers do is they slow the heart rate and they reduce the force of contraction of the heart. The nitrates actually decrease the blood flow to the heart by dilating up veins. They also decrease the workload of the heart. These drugs do decrease the workload of the heart, but they also relieve the constriction that sometimes accompanies these attacks of angina.
And that's the Adalat.
That's right.
The Adalat is the nitrates. Now, is it safe? Because you know how we are perhaps now super cautious in the use of new drugs since the old thalidomide explosion.
Well,
where was this developed? Who developed it? And what kind of tests have been done on it?
Okay. It was developed in Germany, and it's been used in Europe, in Asia, in South America for almost 10 years. It was only released by the Health Protection Branch about 4 weeks ago. And one of the reasons it wasn't released earlier is because we have very, very stringent rules about drug release in this country. And you have to do two things. You have to prove that it's effective in the treatment of the condition it's being prescribed for. And second of all, you have to show that there are relatively few side effects. It's in clinical trials done here and in its use in Europe, there appears to be about an incidence of side effects of about 7%. And the side effects appear to be relatively minor. In fact, they're usually due to the pharmacological action of the drug. You sometimes get lightheadedness or dizziness or flushing, and this is because it does dilate up arteries all over the body.
But there are no really deleterious side effects from it at all?
Not that we know of, not now.
So now the generic name is what?
Nifedipine.
Adalat is a trade name, eh?
Exactly.
For Miles Laboratories.
That's right.
Nifedipine.
Exactly.
Nifedipine. Now, does this use of this Adalat prevent or wipe out the need for corrective surgery in some cases?
No. All we're doing is trying to treat, in fact, it doesn't wipe out the need for the other drugs, the nitrates and beta blocking agents. It can be used in conjunction with these agents to control the symptoms of a relatively serious heart disorder.
It's more successful, therefore.
Well, it's not that it's more successful. It offers the physician another alternative to other drugs. And some of the problems with the other drugs, like with nitrates, you may get headaches, and some people can't use nitrates. With beta blockers, you get side effects like lethargy, tiredness. Some people with lung disease who smoke, like you, can't use it. And some people who have heart failure can't use these drugs. So this offers the physician an alternative form of therapy. It also...
what is the basic ingredient of nifedipine or Adalat?
Okay, well, its pharmacological action is that it blocks calcium entry into the muscle cells, and calcium is essential for muscle contraction. This is why it causes dilatation.
Who's the average angina patient?
The average angina patient would be a person like a male in their late 50s, early 60s, who smokes, who's relatively obese, who has hypertension, who's under a considerable degree of stress. I mean, we don't have to look very far, I'm afraid.
What a friend we have in Dr. Adelman. Have you left some on the desk here?
I'll bring you some, Jack.
More with Dr. Adelman after the break. Now, on the serious side, though, the angina is something that's haunted. How long since it was diagnosed? 100 years? 150 years?
It's been known of at least 200 years. Nitroglycerin has been available for over 100 years for the treatment of this condition.
So it's a man between 50 and 60. You don't need to give me the rest of it. And it's mostly men. Why is it mostly men who suffer from angina and not women?
Well, women are probably protected by the female hormones, at least till the menopause. After the menopause, there's an increase in the incidence of coronary artery disease in women.
Okay, we've got the Adalat, the nifedipine squared away. You're a cardiologist. How often are you using the technique of these multiple bypasses nowadays, and are they proven to extend life for an unlimited normal period?
Okay. Well, I'm heavily involved in bypass surgery. I investigate people for bypass surgery, and certainly in patients who have intractable angina that don't respond to medical therapy that's now available, we would certainly recommend bypass surgery if they were candidates for this form of surgery. Now, it's definitely been proven that bypass surgery relieves symptoms. Whether it prolongs life is debated among the medical profession. There are some centers or some studies that indicate that it does prolong life, but it's much harder to prove that you can prolong life, and I'm a little skeptical about that.
In other words, multiple bypasses become necessary when the arteries are so restricted that it produces the symptoms of angina all the time, I presume.
Exactly. And the person can't do very much, and in those situations it can make this person's life much more violent.
Yeah, a magical kind of treatment. They suddenly get color in their face again for a while.
It's not magical, it's very technical. All you're doing is taking a vein from the leg and bypassing the area of narrowing in the coronary artery.
You just put a kind of corner around it.
That's right,
An
a bypass.
corner.
It's like a bypass.
And do you close off the other one? Do you leave it open too?
We don't.
What's the maximum number of bypasses that can be given in one operation?
Well, I'm sure that some people have done 6 and 7 if they.
6 and 7.
Sure.
It must put an incredible weight of demand on hospitals, because people tend to think the bypasses are a magic cure for all our heart conditions.
Well, there's been a tremendous increase, at least in Ontario, where I come from, in the number of patients we see with this problem and the number of patients that we investigate, and we now have waiting lists both for the investigation and the surgery of 3 or 4 months.
Now, I'm going to take calls in this, I think. Any calls? Okay. Where am I? Go ahead to Dr. Adelman, please. Hello.
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Oh, I'm on, am I?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is directed to the doctor. My husband was diagnosed in 1975 with 2 arteries narrowing, and since that time he's been on 3 different drugs, or 3 drugs altogether, Entrophin, Persantin, and Isidril. Now, he doesn't have angina. He has no problems. The main thing, though, that I have noticed over the last few years is an incidence of headaches and a lot of stomach problems. Now, I'm wondering if the drug you're talking about would decrease that.
Well, it depends on whether it's indicated or at all or not, and that it's really up to your own physician. I think all medical therapy should be individualized, and it's hard to generalize without knowing your husband whether he should take this drug or not, or
but
to change
isn't something she should say to a doctor, hey, saw this fellow from Toronto on Webster the other day, and he was talking about something called Adalat. Will the doctors know about this drug?
They should know about it. It's been in the medical literature for a number of years, Jack, and it's now available.
You've got sufficient faith in it to flog it, you might say.
Well, yeah, okay.
Okay. Anything else, ma'am?
No, actually, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Go ahead to Dr. Adelman.
Hello?
That's you, sir.
Yes. I have a partner who works with me who doesn't sleep very well at all at night. He under a lot of stress. Myself, same thing. The reason is, going back to your previous had on the air,
It's the Royal Bank.
we got 5 mortgages due.
Yeah.
That's a good reason for a lot of stress and heart attacks coming on.
Right, what's the question?
I would like to see more people on the hotlines talking about this problem, and it's going to get a hell of a lot worse, I can tell you that right now.
You talking about banks or angina?
I'm talking about both.
Much obliged, sir. Calls to Dr. Adelman after the break. One thing I want to get clear with Dr. Adelman from Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. This new drug you're talking about, Adalat, does not necessarily replace all the other drugs presently used for the treatment of angina.
Definitely does not. It can be used alone or in conjunction with these drugs as indicated by your own physician.
But seems to have some additional facilities to avoid side effects and increase the flow of blood.
Exactly.
Would this all be tested on animals first or on
Yeah,
humans?
it's basically what the drug companies do is they do bench tests and they come up with a drug which is effective in this case dilating up coronary arteries, and then they...
Dilating means making them bigger?
That's exactly right.
Okie dokie. Don't confuse me with medical expressions. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep, yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm wondering, for another drug called Persanitine that my doctor has had me on he said it was to open arteries also, and I take that in conjunction with aspirin too, 4 times a day. Now, I'm just wondering, see, these are for vascular headaches. Now, I'm only 25 years old. Now, if I have to take these for, lots of years, do these also affect my heart?
No, they won't affect your heart. Not when they're used in that way.
As a matter of fact, is Adalat a specific at all for vascular constriction throughout?
Exactly. It dilates arteries throughout the body, including the coronary arteries, and that's the way it works.
Hasn't been tested for headaches, for vascular restriction of headaches?
It's been tried, but I don't think it's been approved for that use.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. My question is to Dr. Adelman. I'm phoning from my mother-in-law. The doctor diagnosed her as an angina pectoris patient, and he described for her, besides the nitroglycerin tablets, Antivert. Now, what is the difference between Antivert and Adalat?
Antivert. I don't know what that is, ma'am. It's not a commonly used cardiac drug in Ontario, anyway.
She's on it daily.
Antivert. Well, you have to check with your doctor and tell him about Adalat. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I had 2 questions for Dr. Adelman. The first one was, does he know anything about the drug Indrel? Second, I think the woman previously asked the second question, when the doctors in Vancouver would find out about the new drugs.
Okay, 2 questions.
Okay, Inderol is the beta blocking one of the beta blocking agents available for the treatment of angina, and the second question is that I would think that most cardiologists and most physicians are now aware of the availability of calcium blocking agents, which is Adalat is a form of.
Okie dokie, next one. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have a brief question for Dr. Adelman. One of the tests for angina pectoris was the use of a 3-trial administration to a patient of nitroglycerin. Have you found that you can use Adalat in determining?
I'm sorry, what did you say one of the tests was?
One of the tests for angina pectoris was administering nitroglycerin in a 3-trial every 3 minutes by administering nitroglycerin.
Well, one of the ways of making a diagnosis of angina pectoris is to give the patient nitroglycerin to take. And if
Have you discovered that Adalat, you can do that with Adalat?
Oh, yeah. I get the question.
Okay. Adalat
Thank you.
usually is given orally, but it can be given sublingually. It doesn't act quite like nitroglycerin, which has a very rapid effect, and that's why you get the the relief of the pain immediately, and it doesn't obviate the use of nitroglycerin. What it does is, what has been shown is that it does decrease the number of anginal attacks patients have, and this has been done by very objective studies. I won't go into the details. And also, it can increase their exercise tolerance, and it reduces the number of attacks. It isn't used quite like nitroglycerin.
Yeah, one thing, I understand the nitroglycerin was used as an instant remedy for the chest pains.
Yeah.
Adalat is a daily therapy.
That's right. It's a continuous therapy. It's usually taken 3 times a day to prevent the attacks from occurring.
Good. Mind you, are the angina attacks not, in some ways, not desirable, don't misunderstand me, but they at least tell you something's wrong.
That's exactly right. They're really a warning that your heart isn't getting enough blood. But when you relieve the attack, it means that your heart at least is getting enough blood and you don't have anything to worry about. If the angina attack is more prolonged and more severe, it can lead to a heart attack. That's damage of the heart muscle itself.
In other words, Adalat doesn't prevent a heart attack.
No, it relieves the symptoms. It
relieves the
symptoms. Hopefully it may prevent heart attacks, but that hasn't been proven.
It may delay it for a while anyway, if
Sure.
nothing else. What else? What else? Time for a call? 30 seconds? Go ahead, please. Hello. No time for a call.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Adelman came here in quite a bright morning, and anything that helps people with problems is something in which I'm vitally interested. I'm instantly going to stop smoking, lose 50 pounds, stop pressure, and prevent all possibility of angina. After the break. Not quite lined up for tomorrow morning yet. I see I'm doing a bit on, what's that say? Civil liberties. And supposed to be a couple of women here. I'm not so sure about that, though. Get fed up with these status of women people. I'm sure you do as much as I do. But we'll see. It'll be bright anyway. Tomorrow morning with Webster at 9 a.m. precisely. Canada's top money, Martin Porter, on check at midnight.